This is Evan Sharp. Give him a round of applause. Our founder, I think you.
I haven't even done anything.
You met him a few days ago if you were at dinner on Saturday night. Ben Silbermann, thank you. I was just asking Evan about when he decided to transition to playing in your sandbox with Pinterest. It was about 7 years ago. You'd come out of the financial crisis.
Sure, I met Ben through a friend, and we had coffee and started nerding out about the internet. And I always thought I was a nerd about the internet, and this guy was even more nerdy about the internet. He knew everything. And so we really hit it off right away. And I'd been studying architecture in New York. And then at night I was like coding websites to make money and survive in New York because it was really expensive. And a whole bunch of stuff happened, and I ended up leaving school. I was going to move out here to work at Facebook, and I had 3 months off, I think. And Ben had been doing something as well, doing a startup, and I think we caught up briefly and realized, wow, we have this window of time, we should build something together. I always wanted to work on a product together. And so it kind of happened because we really wanted to build something, I think, rather than because there was some big deliberate, at least for me, business plan to make Pinterest a monolithic, huge company. So for me, Pinterest has always been a real passion project, and even though today it's a business, I try and keep that energy every day.
That's probably the biggest effort it takes, is to combine and feeling inspired, called to it every day. Ben, when you called him into service on this, you'd come out of the corporate executive board, you decided that you'd be tinkering with this project. What really called you to this work?
To Pinterest in particular?
Yes.
Well, so I would say two things. Like, I think at a high level, I was really excited about the internet, which sounds really almost like quaint and ridiculous.
He's underplaying it. He was really excited about the internet.
I was very excited about the internet, and the reason I was so excited about it was I was in love with this idea that no matter where you are, you could have access to the same information as everyone else. And that idea is like both very simple, but it's also very profound, depending on where you grew up. And it ends up changing all of these very basic assumptions that we have about society and about culture and about business. So I was really excited about it. I was at the corporate executive board. I was there primarily because they offered me a job.
And Divya as well?
Yeah, well, they didn't offer that. But when I had the chance, I thought it would be great to just move to the place where things were happening in terms of the internet. And so I moved to California, and eventually just wanted to do my own thing. And so that's sort of the first story. That's just how I got from where I was, where originally I was kind of pre-med thinking about being a doctor, out to here. And then I think Evan's story about Pinterest is pretty much on point. We kind of built it for ourselves. It's a product that we both thought would be fun to use, and we didn't have really expectations about whether other people would use it. Actually didn't really care that much about whether other people would use it at the beginning. And so we were both delighted and slightly terrified when a lot of people started using it, because suddenly it felt like now it was not only a responsibility to ourselves, but to all of the people that had entrusted us with their time and with their inspirations.
And then you spent day and night actually talking with them about their experiences. And what did you learn that this made you decide to scale this thing to something that would be larger than your own sandbox?
I'll start. We always have talked to users. I remember when we were smaller, I used to spend all my time coding, like looking at a computer all day. And Ben was doing that too, but he also was on call for all of the support for every user we had. And so his
100%.
phone would ring. Yeah, and it would be like someone from Iowa who couldn't log in, who was yelling at him. It was really amazing. But in a way, I think the spirit of listening to users and meeting them where they live and talking to them is a really important part of us trying to stay true to building a product that is inspirational, it's positive, and has a good impact on people's lives.
Yeah, and I think for us, I remember there was a really distinct moment where we used to do these meetups in San Francisco and in Palo Alto, where we would invite people who used the product just to come hang out. And I think there was a moment where I realized that I didn't know these people personally. So that was a very exciting thing for anyone who's worked on a product. There's a long period where the only people that use it are blood relatives or friends that feel obligated to use it because they know you're going to ask.
I didn't even use it, so that was pretty good.
Yeah. And then the other thing I remember is that for a lot of those early users, they actually really loved the product. For them, this need to have a place where they could get inspired, share their inspirations, and save it, it was very, very powerful for them. And I'm a big believer that it's better to have a product that like a couple people love than a product that a lot of people care about. Because if you have a product that a few people really love, and people loved it, they would send us like gifts. This guy sent us like a crate of barbecue sauce that he had made because he said it had played a big role in life. I think if you have the seed of something that people actually love, you can grow it into something. But if you have something that lots of people just casually use, that's very, very hard to grow a meaningful business out of.
When you think about the folks that really loved it the most, did that point you in a direction of where you wanted to help them the most? Or how did you were pursuing your own passions and inspiration at the same time? Did you feel that you had to facilitate a community in a new way?
I would say that we really just tried to listen to what users said, and then the hard thing about Pinterest in the early days was different people used it in very different ways. And so there was always this push on one hand for people that wanted a very specific feature, but there was a push on the other hand to make it a horizontal tool that could be used by everyone. And I think that's something that I owe a lot to you, Evan, because Evan's a designer, and designers
Well, thank you, Ben.
hate adding complexity to everything. And so a lot of what we did was we listened to the specific things that people asked for and asked ourselves what was the most general way that you could solve that problem, so we didn't sort of box ourselves in. So as a concrete example, in the really early days, there was a very aggressive push by investors and by users to make it a shopping site. They're like, make it a shopping site. You can't monetize people's hero board or inspiring quote board or cute puppies board. And I'm super thankful that we were so resistant to the idea of narrowing it down to a very small group of people, because I think that the product would both be a fraction of its size in terms of the usefulness, but I also think that we would have missed on the opportunity to provide something that brings a lot of people joy and inspiration every day.
How do you feel about that?
I agree. I was dwelling on this story when we were small, like in this little tiny office in Palo Alto, because you were talking about user love. And one day this woman walked in, and we didn't have any reception or anything. It was just like some desks that we'd put together ourselves and a door, and then she just opened the door and walked in, and she was dressed kind of crazy. And we were like, is this okay? Does she work here? Maybe we hired her and forgot, or she was dressed up like Pinterest. She had like images all over her, and it had said Pinterest on her forehead or something. And they realized, oh, it's Halloween, and she just come in to like say hi because she dressed for Pinterest like Halloween. That was really cool. But I don't think I appreciated then how kind of awesome it is that she was, she's an example that she loved the brand, she loved the product so much, she wanted to dress up like it for Halloween. It's a great story.
Vikram was talking about how when he was introduced to, I guess, Diane Keaton, he never had a name. It was always Pinterest. You're the Pinterest guy. You're the Pinterest person. Which
I call Vikram that too, yeah.
And you have not hired anybody and forgot about them.
No.
But you've hired a lot of people since then. What would you wish you knew? And I know there's always a long list when I ask this question. What would you wish you knew about bringing other people into the dream that you wish you knew when you started out doing this work that you've learned in the process?
Well, I'll go first. I think we're still learning. I don't think you ever stop learning about that one. Who you need, how you find the right leaders, put them in the right role, give them the right authority, but not too much authority so that you still know what's going on, and balance that with all of the cultural values you're trying to. So I'm just stating the problem, not the solution. I think most of the biggest improvements we've made to Pinterest have been people. I've been hiring people or taking a bet on somebody or giving them a clear goal and asking them to hit it. And that speaks obviously to the importance of culture, and it's the most number one thing I think for us at the company is building the right culture and the right team to make the product great.
Yeah, there were a couple things that I remember like learning the hard way, I would say. One is there's sort of good experience where you have to hire someone that's done it before, and there's bad experience where someone who's done it before thinks they know how to do it, and so they're just going to apply basically their playbook every time. And I think knowing the difference between the two is really different, and I've made mistakes on both sides of it. I've put people into positions where it just probably wasn't fair to them because it was asking them to learn at a rate that was unreasonable. No one's like a management prodigy. There are piano prodigies and physics prodigies. There's no 15-year-old that's like the world's greatest manager. You just have to learn it through trial and error, and then you can read books and get coaching if you're lucky to help make you better. And at the same time, I would say some of the business choices we made over the years weren't based on first principles thinking. They were based on somebody coming from another company and saying, "Hey, trust me, this worked." And I'm a really big believer that like you should trust people, but if they can't explain it to a reasonably intelligent person, there's no reason that you should believe just because they happen to have done it before. So that was kind of one big area. And then other thing is like, you just can't teach judgment. People either have good judgment around situations and people or they don't, especially if you're growing really quickly and they don't have time to develop it piece by piece. And so I remember there are some folks that we've hired where looking back on it, they either succeeded or failed. But often it was just whether they had good kind of first principles judgment and thinking that in retrospect would have been the predictor of that.
You've often said that you think success is quite a good teacher, and there's always some controversy about whether we learn more from our failures or our successes. Where do you currently stand on that philosophy right now in terms of what you get from the experience that you're on?
Oh, I think both. I mean, I said that because, I don't know, people really like repeating these like management platitudes that they read on LinkedIn or something, and they're like, failure is the greatest teacher of all. And I think that's a really useful comment because when you fail, you might as well make something good of it. So like there's no upside to just feeling bad about yourself. But in reality, like we all study successful companies, we study successful athletes, we study successful mathematicians because there are fewer reasons in general that someone can be successful than studying every single failed case. And so I think teams tend to underdo that. When things go well, they're not introspective about why they went well because they're psyched. They're like, oh, that went well. That number went up and to the right. Like,
Or they
I'm sure that'll just continue inevitably. And so I think the management sort of platitude that you should learn from failure is now so firmly ground into people that people need less of a reminder of it. And I think far more people fail to really be self-critical about why a particular outcome succeeded when you didn't think it would initially, and then make sure those lessons are then replicated through time.
How are you thinking differently about designing things to be useful to people in the ways that you have come to understand that they wanted to be treated and engaged in your service? How are you thinking about that these days in terms of design?
Well, first I'd say I think of myself as much designing the company these days as I do designing the product. Maybe that sounds a little cliche, but I think as an architect, you're kind of taught to build a house and then be done. It's sort of this beginning and end process, and then at the end you take a photo of the building and put it on your portfolio. But the company never ends, obviously, and so the metaphor we've been using is much more like a garden, and I found that really useful, thinking about how you design an environment in which people can grow and be nurtured, and you also have to trim the garden and pull the weeds, and that mindset and that kind of relationship with the company as a designer has been really fruitful the last year, I would say. And when it comes to users, it's not dissimilar. Ben and I have been about to go on a trip in 2 weeks to his hometown in Iowa to kind of meet with some users and talk to them about the phone and the internet and Pinterest, what they love, what they hate. But so we've made a concerted effort to literally just spend more time with users and talk to them and learn from them and take those insights seriously and treat every single user's individual experience with kind of the reverence it deserves and bring those back to the company. And I think, trying to build a positive place online that's inspiring, it gives you energy, gets you offline, connects you to what you love is a really valuable thing given the scale we're at these days online.
I want to make sure that we open this now for all of you to participate in the Q&A. So please approach if you can. We have a couple of microphones available and would love for you to be able to participate in asking questions here. We have one here and one there. I wanted to, as people are getting identified, we get the microphones to them, I wanted to ask about what is really inspiring you the most in terms of your personal interests on Pinterest right now? I mean, how are you continuing to be reconnected with the service that you're using? Or do you find yourself kind of re-energized whenever you go out and interact with people in a deeper way? You're in the weeds of running a business. I'm asking about how it is.
I'll go first. What's inspiring us these days, basically,
yeah.
with Pinterest? Everything. I've been on a journey, I think, the last 6 months with Ben and others to kind of more deeply understand the behavior that's happening on Pinterest. Why is it we built an image bookmarking service that's now being used for these deeply personal, deeply emotional reasons? We didn't set out to build that. We set out to build something a little bit more utilitarian. And so learning about, the relationship the eye and images play and helping you understand what your dreams are, and images are almost a language of dreams, and that we're building a tool to help. All of that, understanding the underlying psychology has really motivated me and giving me a lot more ideas, I think, for how we can make both the products we're building and the stories we're telling deeper and more in line with the purpose we have as a company. So that's been really inspiring, that journey, which is still going right now.
How about you, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Evan said, I think that it's funny, sometimes when you make things it takes you a while to really appreciate what's at the core of the thing at the beginning. There's this old expression that like you go on a journey to discover what you love about your home. And I feel in a little way like Evan and I have kind of gone on this journey and we've come back to something that our very early users could articulate extremely clearly, that Pinterest is a place where I get inspired to create a life that I love. And in Silicon Valley, like words like inspiration and love, they're thought of as very intangible, whereas like information, connection is thought of as a very tangible physical thing, even though common sense would tell you that emotions are very real things and very powerful in people's lives. And so to me at least, the idea that you could build a tool that would reliably help people find the inspiration that they need for the next phase in their life is a very beautiful and a very challenging idea. And it's something that it's not going to be enabled by one thing, like by one breakthrough in machine learning or by one right hire or by one marketing campaign. But it's something that if you actually pulled it off and thought about it, could be very, very profound for people's lives. And I think that today, more than ever, especially young people, feel a very strong desire to have more space to think about who they are and who they want to be and have a tool to visualize how to get there in the future. So that's kind of the what we're building. And then the other thing that I'm inspired by is our team. Evan and I always joke that like we could never get hired here anymore, and by anymore I mean in the last 5-6 years probably. But truly, I think the greatest perk of like starting a company is you have a legitimate reason to get all these incredibly talented people that you kind of have no business working with to work on a project, and not only to work on the project that you want, but to kind of bring their own creativity and genius to that project as well. And so when I think of a lot of the things that we're building now, or the things that I'm most proud of that we built over the last year, so many of them, I don't think I could have imagined. I don't think we ever imagined that we'd be able to build them. And that's a testament to the people that we've been lucky enough to hire.
That's beautiful. Our first question. Fiona, please.
Thanks so much for your remarks. As you, through your lens as leaders, when you see other startups that are succeeding, failing, or maybe flopping around, what are the kind of patterns you're observing? Like if you had the time to kind of tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, let me give you 10 minutes of advice based on my experience, what would you offer? What do you see as sort of some of the greatest steps and missteps that your younger peers are taking?
I'll go first. I consider Ben the entrepreneur, so he'll have a more, no pressure, a better answer than I will. For me, I always like to focus on one thing and try and make it phenomenal. It's just like an intrinsic way I work. And so often, I don't talk to startups as often as I'd like to, but when I do, often I see them trying to make everything good rather than find the one thing that if it's great will carry the rest of the business. And I think Pinterest had some of that early on, the one or two things that made Pinterest really compelling. Everything else, we had no measurement, we had no search, we had nothing else, but the one or two things were good enough that the rest of it got built on the strength of those. And so I'd say focus on the one thing that really matters to customers or users.
Ben, please.
Oh, I was just thinking, sorry.
Sorry, I put you on the spot.
I don't know. Evan knows this. So, like, I'd never gone to a gym before until a few years ago.
Yeah, but you're doing well now.
Thank you, Mark. So I got a trainer since I didn't know what I was doing. And, like, halfway through the first workout, I was like, is it supposed to feel like this? And she's like, yep, that's how it's supposed to feel.
You mean it hurts?
Yeah, it just feels terrible.
Yeah.
And
it was not instantly satisfying experience.
And I feel like that's what starting a company is like. And that's how it's supposed to feel. Because you're doing something that you don't know if it's going to work. You don't know, you're not qualified for the role by definition. Most people want certainty, and it's the one thing you can't provide. And I think, I wish that I would have just embraced that more and actually challenge all of our teams to embrace that as well, rather than saying, oh, don't worry, we're going to solve that for you. Because that's what you sign up for. And it's supposed to feel like that. And And I think that's okay. And if you can actually celebrate that and over time learn to enjoy that feeling, the experience of starting the company will be both more fun and you'll be less buffeted by the inevitable things that are going to go wrong or sideways or not turn out the way you'd expected.
I don't know if people hear this sort of answer so many times, Ben, about the painfulness of getting started and how important that is. I'm called to the moment when Benita was learning about how to be a mom, and she was asking people. They said, "Are you going to get through it? It's fine. It's not that big a deal. You know, you could get the drugs and everything." And then finally, she felt reassured once someone actually told her that it would be horribly painful and it would be a near-death experience. And then she was able to get through it. And I've heard more entrepreneurs talk that way about it. Other questions? Right here.
Thank you. My question is about disruption. As here, Silicon Valley is like source of disruption for the rest of the world. You should be thinking probably about what is disruption for Pinterest. What can be the disruptive idea for Pinterest?
I have a bad relationship with that word. It's like a bone to pick for me. You guys ever watch Star Trek? What do they call the weapons that they've disruptors? The spirit of what you're saying, I totally agree with, which is you can never be complacent. You constantly have to challenge yourself. But I do also want to just hijack your question. I'm sorry, to do a little bit of a no, just yeah. I think it's funny. California is obviously the land of disruption. There's geological disruption every 30 years. There's economic disruption every 50 years. There's all sorts of disruption all the time. But I also find that sometimes there's a faith that disruption is a positive thing and that can be really destructive, and that we need to be much more conscious and be much more ethical about the way we disrupt things and much more aware of our own limitations and what we don't know. I'll stop.
That's a deep point about it's not really that we're setting out here to disrupt in the Valley or in California. It's about trying to make something so much better that it solves a problem or enhances somebody's lives. And if you're not paying attention to a user or a customer, that's going to feel really damn disruptive. It's going to feel like an interruption. And how do you feel about that, Ben?
Around disruption? Look, I think the thing I always tell the company is they should be maniacally obsessed with the unmet needs of the people that use our product and the unmet needs of all the people that don't use the product. And I'm a very tightly wound person, so like I pay a ton of attention, like I know what every company is doing. But the reason that I say that is I think that if you focus 100% and completely on what are the unmet needs of your customers, which for us are to discover inspiration, your team will come up with the solutions they need to be successful.
Was there Clara in the back? Who has a microphone? Oh, okay. Brian.
So first of all, congratulations on all of your success. So we live in a world where if you are a top tennis player or a top golfer and you don't have a coach, the commentators will reference the fact, can they win without their coach? So I'd like to get some feedback from you guys on why you think it's important for top execs to have coaches and the value it's added to you in your trajectory.
Well, I can speak to myself. I don't know that I can speak to executives, but I think for me, having Mark coach me over the last few years has just unlocked my own ability to see myself, grow myself, be myself at work in ways I probably never would have achieved. Having someone to kind of be a mirror, someone to give me shit, someone to kind of know what the next step is, both in terms of like, oh, my team's messed up, what's wrong, but also why am I not happy? And seeing that me being happy in myself at work is a necessary step to me being the effective executive I could be. All of that, I think, would not have happened without someone like Mark, without Mark. So that's the value I've gotten out of it.
I feel I've learned more from the two of you than I'm able ever to offer. Ben, how have you felt about having another trainer around in your life?
Look, I think it's super important. I mean, Evan and I had never managed anyone, like as a starting point, like not junior management or like low, like we'd never managed anyone. I'd never even sort of had managers that I particularly looked up to. So a lot of people will pattern match off of a manager they had. And so it stands to reason that you need someone to help out to get better. And for me, like I try to like look at a lot of different things that can be helpful. I think books are quite underrated these days. It's like people spend quite a lot of time writing things down that take a long time for them to think about, but a lot of people actually don't read books. I read a lot of books. I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I talk to a lot of peers that are a little bit ahead. And then I think a coach is pretty unique because obviously a coach is interactive and they're paid by you. And so their interest is you rather than anything else. And that's a pretty special thing because I think as companies get bigger, everyone has an interest. Optimistically, it's the company's interest. You can't always even count on that, but optimistically, it's the company's interest, but it's certainly not your interest in becoming the best version of yourself that you can. And so I think that's a very privileged and trusted place that a coach can have if they build the right relationship. And it's a huge responsibility, actually. So I really appreciate what this group does because it's a challenging thing, and it's a special kind of person that can find their satisfaction in seeing someone else be successful. We need more people kind of in the world that do that, and those people tend to be like teachers and doctors and coaches. So I think it's a really valuable thing everyone here has chosen to spend their time on.
Clara?
Yes.
My question is, so I spent a number of years in Silicon Valley at Twitter, and I left a long time ago, but when I was there, my focus was on social innovation from the impact side. So I'm super interested in this idea of technology for good, right? And we're kind of at the end of, or in the midst of kind of the worst year of social media's life, certainly, and there's been fallout into other companies that aren't necessarily focused on social media, right? And so it's been super interesting to hear you guys today. I mean, some of the language, the way users are entrusting us, be maniacally obsessed with the unmet needs, things like that are pretty unusual. And I'm wondering, have you felt any of sort of the negative ramifications of this challenging narrative that a lot of your sort of sister and brother companies are in the midst of?
There's like a 5-hour answer to that.
Okay.
But I'll start. I mean, I think we're, Ben and I are citizens of the world as much as we are at Pinterest, and we care about the internet. I mean, the internet is the technology of our age. And we're in this transition from, mainstream broadcast culture where there are like 20 voices telling you what the story is to network culture where everyone has a voice and it's on the audience now to determine if those voices are credible or not, which makes no sense. There's no way anyone can keep up with that. And so we're just in the midst of this massive technological change. And the thing I'm the most passionate about is the role that we, as people who work in this industry, can play in making that change positive is massive. One thing I can say with a lot of confidence is, the impact that these companies like Pinterest have in the world is directly related to the values of the leaders and the founders and the employees that work there every day that guide their decision making. And that's not to say we're perfect at all, but I think it's really important that we have a strong sense of the ethical responsibility we have, and we try and make that happen within the constraints of you need a successful business, and it's all ambiguous, no one's done this before, et cetera. So I would say we've been relatively grateful so far that a lot of the bad downside social media haven't yet become a big issue for us. I expect that might change one day. And the way we're reacting to it is trying to build a more responsible way of working and a more responsible leadership team over time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's super important. And I think we have been affected by it. And maybe part of the reason Evan was emotional about the word disruption is I think in Silicon Valley uniquely, people place a huge premium on the idea of change for its own sake, and they love things that go fast. Basically, like things that go fast are better things that go slow. and things that change are probably going to be good. Even though the long arc of history says that that's true in the sort of zoomed out sense for the most part, but not necessarily in any given 5, 10, or 15-year period. So, look, I think the best that we can do within Pinterest is try to guide it against a set of values that we believe in, kind of challenge whether we're delivering on those regularly, and be honest with ourselves. And then when we make mistakes, and I'm sure we will, and have some huge problem that we inadvertently created or some huge press storm, actually try to take ownership over those and then do our best. And I think if you do those things, that's kind of all that you can ask of an individual in their life or of a company in its life. And then you have the other institutions in the world that you need besides private businesses that play different roles that like people created for a reason. Like there's a reason there are governments and nonprofits and businesses and religions and art. You know, like there's a reason. These are all human inventions. They're all tools that have been created for a problem to be solved. And business is good at one set of problems, but not at all problems. And that's something I've always believed. Like I don't know. I was like a political science major. You were a history major.
Yes, sir.
But I think that there's a little bit of myopia in believing that a single discipline will solve all of the world's problems. That's endemic right now to this place and time. But it'll change because the people here are smart and they're thoughtful and they want the best for the world ahead.
So based on sort of some of what you described, which didn't go directly to the management structure of Pinterest, but it sounds like quite a flat and non-hierarchical organization. When people join from other companies or from other cultures, what tends to be the biggest adjustments they need to make, or what issues sometimes do you encounter with fit?
You know, I wouldn't say it's particularly flat. I don't think we love huge hierarchies, but sorry, I'm not answering your question. I'm just reacting to your first statement. I don't know. I think at this level, we have new leaders join. It's a whole process of making sure that they come in, understand what's working well, but not get trapped by feeling like everything's been done, or feeling like the things I hear shouldn't be changed. And so it's that balance between how much do they change right away versus how much do they stop and listen, and that's difficult to get right.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of people struggle when their expectations of uncertainty and ownership are different from their previous job to their current one. And so this cuts both ways. Like if you come from a 30-person organization where everyone just does whatever they want, it can be really jarring to join an organization of more than 1,000 people where we still want you to take ownership, but you got to give people a heads up before you just like push code into production or kind of say something to a partner, because there's a little bit of a coordination cost. And on the flip side of it, which is more common because large companies have more people and therefore we recruit more than them as a function of that, at large companies, like people are often trained to stay within their swim lane and to interpret unexpected things as intrinsically negative. Because there are literally layers of the organization at large companies that are specifically designed to reduce the impact of uncertainty to every person in the organization. Like that's what organizational structures are supposed to do. And so it can be really jarring for folks when they're dropped into a situation and asked to own a very, very uncertain problem. And there are only a handful of companies, and we've all heard of those companies, that have managed to retain the best parts of ownership, but done it at a very, very large scale. And when those companies get it right and they get fortunate in the business environment, you see them achieve really great things. And I think the company that a lot of people consider to be a great balance of that today is a company like Amazon, which kind of has broken the traditional trade-off between scale and innovation that in the late 80s, early 90s was thought of as almost a law of physics. And I think that's probably a testament to the culture, the values, and I've heard Jeff Bezos is a good CEO. He probably did a good job on that one as well.
I'm just curious, you folks are making a big difference in a lot of people's lives around the world and how this all works. How does it work as a company? What's the economic model for how this works?
Advertising.
Who's paying you and how does that work?
Advertisers, so companies, retailers, SMBs pay us. I mean, Pinterest is a place people are coming to discover ideas for their life, and often they see something on Pinterest and then they actually get offline and do it, like they buy it or they make it. But so it's really, the definition of inspiration, we like to say, is the feeling of wanting to do something. And so if you're feeling inspired, you're likely to do something, and that's good for a lot of businesses. So being on Pinterest helps them get discovered and helps people find those businesses when they're in the mindset of dreaming about, thinking about what they want to do in their future. So it happens to be a particularly valuable place.
And then right here.
Thank you again for your hospitality. We really appreciate you. Following on the questions of coaching, if you kind of go back, you've been working with Mark for a couple of years. When was the event or moment that you kind of said, "Oh, I need help, and I'm willing to open up for asking for help"? What was that tipping point that says, this is the time to get some help and coaching?
I think I could speak for both of us, but I'll speak for myself and say I always think I need help all the time at everything. And so it's actually, I've never had that problem. That leads to other problems. And so, I had a coach before Mark, great experience. I'm always active seeking help from other people.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like probably the first day of the company, because everything we've done, we hadn't done it before. So it's like, okay, you have to negotiate a lease. That guy needs a visa, so you have to fill out the paperwork. You have to interview someone. I'd never interviewed anyone before, because I was like extremely junior. You have to hire them, give them an employment contract. Then you end up having a management structure. How do you structure them? Literally like every single thing. I don't know, like I have like all these like how to start a business in 100 days books at my house.
You used to study everything.
Well, because like I was like, well, I can do 100 days. Like that seems like a reasonable time investment.
Enough books, you could do every job, right?
Yeah, so I've always been really. I feel like to Evan's point, like we've always been very active in soliciting input, and then at some point the more important question becomes like whose input do you take and whose don't you? Because people tend to aggressively generalize from a very small set of experiences and then present it as a rule. Like that's just what people do. Like you can't help it. But you saw this most acutely like when we were trying to learn how to raise money, and you would ask people and they would just literally repeat their playbook as if it was the only way. They're like, well, you should get a rotating set of credit cards and pay one off with the other. And don't worry, the interest won't catch you as long as you can raise before you run out of getting credit cards. Because there are businesses that we've all heard of that did that, and it was enormously successful and non-dilutive. And so people do tend to generalize experience quite a lot. And I think it takes somebody special who's seen a bunch of different people and a bunch of different situations to be able to describe a general rule, but assess the situation individually for yourself, like putting like Evan Sharp or Ben Silbermann into the seat, because some advice that would work well for a lot of people like is not going to actually be useful for that individual depending on where they are.
Evan, you came with two comments. One was advertisers, and the other one was your passion in the past, which we're on right now, I think, human psychology. My thinking is, besides having advertisers as your revenue platform, you're sitting on the biggest human insights of anyone, because you can predict tastes before it happens, preferences, emotions before it happens, which could make you become the Gartners of that or some other Nielsen research company. So it seems like you can monetize a whole different dimension and sell that to companies, just like if you take Simrise or some of the fragrance companies which have people walking around the world taking photos of people's color preferences and translate it into taste or smell, you could do exactly the same. What's your thinking on that?
If you want a job, let me know. That sounds great. Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess the way to say this is words are the language of knowledge, images are the language of dreams. And so, at the scale of over 200 million people using Pinterest every month to interact with and engage with ideas that represent their future aspirations. There is a lot of information we have in our data about what's interesting, what's top of mind, what people's preferences are, how they're changing. We do partner a little bit with some businesses right now to help them inform their product development, and I think that could be really interesting in the future and get more people to work on that kind of problem.
So an earlier question asked today is one of the leaders of how do they coach or mentor others, and I'm just wondering if you could talk about how your own commitment to coaching and mentoring others.
I can say that I don't really coach other people. I try to hire people that I can learn from, and I tell them that like part of being on the C team is like you can run yourself and you'll be autodidactic and you have to learn. Because candidly, like if my CFO is like learning about finance from me, that would be a huge problem because I only know what I saw on YouTube like last night. Actually, I think that if there's a difference, of course. Like you can give people feedback on how they're doing, on what's working in the organization, on what's not doing in the organization. But quite truthfully, like if the person is learning a lot more from me than I'm learning from that person, it's a sign, given how quickly we're growing, that I probably don't have the perfect set. And that's a different message than I would give to a lot of other employees. I think it's something unique to being on the executive and leadership team. That at the point that you have that job, like you're accountable to be successful for a big area of the business on day zero. You're not growing into another role. Like there's no next job for you. Like this is the job, and we as a team are the ones that fully own the outcomes of the business.
Just going on from that, how do you hire? How do you choose who to hire, and then where they? So going off the last question, how do you choose who to hire, and how long do they have to prove that they do actually meet the expectations you're speaking about, and realize the visions that you guys have, and you've expressed an effective carte blanche that you give them to realize those visions?
I'll start. I mean, we both spend an enormous amount of time hiring executives at this point. It's one of the most important things we can do to grow the company. I mean, pretty basic answers. I think we figure out what we need for the next 12 to 18 months, what we need the team to do, and then we think about what criteria or characteristics we need the candidate to match. And then, for example, I've just been doing a search for an executive, and I probably met 60 people over the last 6-7 months to try and learn about what's possible. It's a new area for us. Find the right few people who really check not just all of the actual functional boxes we need, but also the cultural boxes. And then when you find the one or two, you just go all out to get them and make it really personal and really authentic, and hopefully that translates into they feel that energy, and that translates into them accepting and coming.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I think the hardest part of doing that process well is you haven't personally run the company that'll be in 6, 12, 18 months. At least we haven't. Yeah. Maybe other people have. And so we spend a lot of time talking with people that are explicitly not on the market. And people are generally pretty generous with their time. So before hiring a CFO, I met with CFOs that had great jobs at huge companies, and I would ask them, if you were me and the company was here, what would you be looking for? Who would you be looking for? What would you ask to assess that? And I think that formula is actually just a pretty good recipe for life. Like most people, they make extremely, extremely important life decisions, but the one thing they leave out is just asking someone that's on the other side of that decision, what's it like? And I felt this the most with all my friends who went to law school. I don't know, they all went to law school, and none of them talked to people who had been lawyers. And then 5 years out of law school, some of them were really sad about being lawyers, and I'm like, have you talked to anyone that's going into law school? They're like, no one asks. They're just going.
Thank you for this extraordinary manifestation of humility. It's remarkable. Really
just one more question.
So we saw the slide earlier that talked about the demographics of your users, 70% women and 30% men. Do you see that as a problem that you want to try to correct? Or do you see it as kind of just the organic self-organization of your community and you embrace it?
I think it's great. I don't know, I think it's amazing. More than half the women in the US will use Pinterest this year, and I'm really grateful for that. Women have long loved Pinterest, and the one thing I was going to add to what Ben said is with hiring, we do the Rooney Rule at high levels in the company, and what that says is I'll get back to your question, before we extend an offer to a candidate, we always have to interview at least 2 women. Sounds obvious, but doesn't always happen, or at least 2 people come from a minority ethnic background in the United States, so that's 4 people total in addition to the slate sometimes. And I found that often over and over again has led to better outcomes. It's forced us to take a little bit longer, and that's been really painful, but you end up finding a better leader, even if they're not a woman or from a minority ethnic background. Put that to the side. I don't know, people ask us that a lot. I'm not quite sure why. it's interesting. Facebook is, I assume, minority women. I assume Snapchat's minority women. And if we were minority male, I doubt people would be asking us as much about that, although I might be wrong. I bet Reddit gets questions about that all the time. I think to bring up to a high level principle, I think Pinterest is about inspiring you, helping you create a life you love. I think everybody has that need. We're finding, Americans have that need. We're finding people internationally have that need as well. And so I think that applies to men too. I'd love to have as many men using Pinterest as women.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think inspiration is a human need. I do think there are sociological reasons why I think a lot of men don't feel comfortable saying, I'm looking for inspiration. It just doesn't feel as comfortable. And I think that, like a lot of things, there are areas where I think women are a little bit ahead culturally, and things are going to catch up over time. But I also do think, kind of in the spirit of being honest, one thing that we do a lot is we try to ask ourselves, for a man who tries the service and it doesn't stick, or says, hey, I'm never going to tell my friends that I'm using Pinterest. Why is that? And what should we do to make that better? Because I think if we don't address that reality head on, the probability of solving that problem is extremely low. And so we have teams that do that, and we bring in users. And I think over the long term, it's very important to both of us that we build a product that's valuable for everybody.
Can we give these gentlemen a big round of applause? Thank you so much for making this happen.